All right, guys. Um, Welcome to the Express Technical Committee meeting for June the 29th. I had a little technical difficulties from myself to get started, but we're all here. We have with us Blake, Yapa, Linus, and Rand, and myself, Douglas, ready for the participants. We have a few items that were on our agenda, at least to start with. That is the Express 4.14 release. Just some information about it that was released between these two meetings. We want to touch on the promised Async and Express 5 because I know there was mainly because there was a user coming about it, and I just wanted to make sure that we at least touched upon kind of like what's outstanding, what's not, and like what the state of it kind of is. We want to talk about making a new Express 5 alpha release with Michael's changes and the 4.14 changes. Probably maybe doing that sometime this week or so. And then we wanted to touch on another issue that was, I know, recently talked about in some of the repos, which is, I called it, what are the responsibilities of the router? So that was in the router module and stuff. There was just someone talking about, commenting on just router and, putting it, browserifying it, and that it requires buffer, and that it's sending a response for the options, is how it handles like automatic head and automatic options kind of stuff, and just wanted to touch on there and just everybody's thoughts. It's not anything definitive, but want to do that. I know Yapa added to touch on plans for the next version of the Express generator, as right now the Express generator still generates Express 4.13. Well, package.json with 4.13, obviously you can just change it, but still, we have a bunch of stuff queued up there, and I've been trying to pick off stuff there, so he wanted to touch on that as well. So, all right, well, let's get started with the Express 4.14. I put down retrospective, but just about it, I guess. So just so everybody knows, everybody here and listening, is that Express 4.14 was released, I think, not last week, but the week before. No, last week. The beginning of last week. And that was the first kind of real Express release after the changes, after the formation of the Express DC, all that kind of stuff. It's actually our newest minor version, I think, in about a year. So 4.13, I think, was about almost a year ago, give-ish or take-ish. That's not the last Express release, just the last minor. We've had patches since then. So, yep, and I think that went pretty well. We went and, we used the pull request release method, so it was there and hopefully as visible as we could make it, for comments and things. And it looks like it seemed to work a little bit, because I know that there was a couple comments I got, and there's also a couple comments I got that wasn't actually in that thread, I think because it was related to some security stuff or whatever. So there is that also helped. That also kind of rushed it a little bit. So the biggest problem with this Express releases is just getting all of the pieces of it, all the dependencies, just bumped up and everything. So people, because I don't know, I don't really hear too much from the community too much, but I mean, in the end, I know that I've always favored having long, stable releases. I mean, obviously, it being a year since the last minor is a long, long time, but not that long per se. But just we don't necessarily want to like rush out a minor every single month unless we have like a good reason to, rather than oh we forgot this stuff kind of a thing. So if we're actually like pounding out like new features, that's perfectly fine, I think. And we haven't done that yet. I mean, it might change in Express 5, who knows. But yeah, so I think it went pretty well. We haven't actually, so it's 0.0 still with the patch, and we haven't seen any issues pop up with people like saying that there is some major something regression or anything like that. So that's pretty good. There's been a couple of those a long time ago, so we haven't gotten any this time. So it seems pretty stable. I mean, you know, we try our best to make sure that doesn't happen, but you never know. And I know people have been upgrading it because one of our dependencies it's marked as vulnerable in the Node Security Project's database. So people have been upgrading it since we released it. So, and it's also, forgot to call this out too. It's actually also now, so Express 4 or Express 3.x has essentially been, quote, like unsupported since August of last year, so almost a year ago. Basically saying like, yeah, we're just not going to try anymore, you know, because it's just a pain, especially because Express 3.x, the biggest pain is it having all those bajillions of dependencies. So it was just a large pain, you know. Express 4.0 has been out for a long, long time as it is, so I think at least 2 years now, if not over 2 years. And we're trying to I wanted to move the effort from maintaining Express 3 into pushing forward Express 5 was the reason behind it. And the reason I bring Express 3.x up is just for anybody using it. So like, there now is definitely at least a confirmed vulnerability in Express 3.x. The vulnerability isn't an out-of-the-box vulnerability. You actually have to use the API that's affected by the vulnerability to actually be affected, and there are ways to work around it. But, you know, I just wanted to call that out there because we put on our site for a while that it may have known vulnerabilities and whatever, and so we actually do know of one, and we have no intention of releasing a patch for it, because it's just, you know, our efforts are better put towards, you know, working on Express 5, working through issues with Express 4, and for those people who are still really using it, they can always apply like a patch. In fact, I think that website Snike, I think it's called, it's like a newish one. Actually has like a little database that can auto apply patches for certain things to modules anyways. So there's always ways to fix it yourself. But yeah, anybody else here have any comments they want to talk about on Express 4.14? Things they, you know, didn't like about how it was done, or everybody thought it was done perfectly reasonable. The reason I bring that up is just because it's our first release, right? And we kind of like, we wrote down, like Mike helped write down like the release procedure that I was doing before, and so I tried to do that here too. And I mean, if everybody thinks it's fine, then there's no reason to change it, and then we can go ahead and actually probably just solidify that even more, and, you know, try to get that, you know, get that releases.md file into our repo. So cool. All right. Well, let's move on to the promise/async in Express 5. So primer for everybody listening, you know, especially those who may not know the difference between promise and async. They're exactly the same thing. An async is a function, so you mark a function as async, and what that does is it basically causes that function to return a promise, and you can use and there's the await keyword, which allows you to await the resolution, or the resolution of a promise, and throw on the rejection of a promise that you're awaiting. And marking a function as async allows you to put like awaits in there, and it just does everything for you. It does like essentially all the hookups and wiring for you. So async await is kind of like sugar on top of just raw promises with standard functions. But as far as Express is concerned, the support would look the same, so there wouldn't be anything Express would necessarily have to care if you're using an async function versus a regular function. And I don't even think that it's possible to detect if a function is an async one or not, given the function's reference. But I don't 100% know, so anybody who thinks that you can, let us know. But essentially, there's been some comments on it. So everybody knows today, essentially we're talking about middlewares and handlers in Express 5 Express routing, where it's a function. It takes 3 arguments, just the standard stuff, a rec, a res, and a next, and you can read from rec, you can write to res, and then you can use next to invoke the next handler or middleware, or send an error down the pipeline by giving it an argument, or don't call it at all and you basically halt the chain. Those are like the options that you have, and we don't care about the return value of a middleware handler. We just completely ignore it. So whether it returns undefined, it returns something, who knows. So the idea here is that, and I put this on the Express 5 a long time ago because I think it is valuable in some regard, is somehow supporting like promises / async functions out of the box. The biggest question is just how to do it specifically, and so why I say that is because if you think of like the high level thing, if you were to use a promise today, which I have experience doing myself, pretty much all you would really do is you set up your promise chain, and then the last thing on your promise chain, if you're chaining it within your handler directly, you put .catch next at the bottom of your chain. That will forward any rejections down through the middleware, but it won't do anything for resolutions. And then if you want, you can then usually call next function manually if you wanted to go next or not. There's been all the current proposals that lay out for either in pull requests or in people dropping by is pretty much that exact pattern, but making it so they don't have to write the one line catch next at the bottom. So that's the only proposals that have really been put forward so far. So essentially, we would invoke the function, the middleware function or handler function, and then Express would have to interrogate the return value of said function and see if it's a promise. And if it is a promise, it would then the promise and basically add a rejection handler and make the rejection handler forward the rejection onto the next middleware. And of course, it would do we'd probably want to have to think about something about promises are a little different than the classic handler, because it's perfectly fine to so in classic callbacks, you can usually you're only supposed to provide an error object for the error argument of the function. But I mean, promises really there's no real that I'm aware of reason to not reject non-errors as the rejection. But forgive me if I'm wrong there, just because I'm still pretty green to promises, which is yet another reason why I haven't personally put too much thought in it, because I still haven't just dug into promise culture enough to really have good thoughts on that. Obviously, we have to, like I said, the proposals so far only correspond to rejection of promises, not resolution of promises. So there are many ways we can go down. Just I was brainstorming myself, but I would love to hear proposals from people here, people in the TC, people in the community. You know, that's why we kind of like have them kind of open too. I mean, what we're really looking for is proposals for how to actually really handle them in a good way. So the biggest is resolution. Like some thoughts are, Express right now really has, besides my saying the words middleware and handlers, Express actually internally has no real way to distinguish between middlewares and handlers. So a middleware, just to give the difference, is usually we call a middleware a rec-res next function that always does a next, as in like it's supposed to do some action, load something from the database, populate something, and then next the response without an error. And a handler is your function that would not call next. So it's your thing that writes a response out to the client. It's a thing that's doing the end action, basically. So it would usually not call next unless there is an error to go down the pipe, and it would actually be the one responding to the client. So obviously you can there are a gray area where you can write a middleware that sometimes does one and sometimes does the other, but for now, that's kind of like what I mean when I say the distinguishing words. So my point is Express has no built-in way to distinguish between the two. So when we talk about what do we do when a promise resolves, to me, means like we might want to make the distinction between those two, because you can think of a middleware resolving would just automatically go to the next middleware, right? You can think of it, load the user, you resolve it, fine, goes next, who knows. A handler resolving like does nothing because they should have written to the response. The only time we can make that do something is if we change a lot of the architecture of Express and, for example, made it like some of the more traditional frameworks and like some type languages. I know like Nancy, FX, and C# and things like that, where you can have an actual response object. So if we did something like that, you can think of a promise would construct a result object, not the res. It wouldn't touch the res, but kind of like construct the result object, and resolve that. And we would say, oh, something was resolved. Oh, it was a response object. So don't go next. Just send that response out, kind of a thing. You can do intermediaries where the resolution could be the body, kind of like an intermediate one might be if people think about Koa, how there's the context.body, or I think res.body or whatever, where basically you just set a body and you can set it to like a stream or a string and things like that, and it would just go. Though, of course, the person would have to still call a bunch of other things beforehand to set stuff up, which is not very decoupled. But yeah, I don't know. So those are just my thoughts on it, and just for you guys, but also for everybody else there to kind of like a little bit, I guess, more understand like, why it is how it is right now. It's just because I feel personally like there hasn't really been thought put into it, and the only proposals that have been pushed forward so far were just handling rejections, completely ignoring what we should even do on resolutions of these promises. And we could certainly put the rejection handling like into one of the Express 5 alphas and just sit it there. I just don't feel like it's really that useful like as a full-fledged feature, especially because as a middleware, you would really want a resolution, I feel like, to go to the next middleware, because that just feels more intuitive, I would think, but certainly promise people can tell me otherwise as well.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Can I leave some comments?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I've actually thought about it a lot. And I think the only thing that we can do properly is catch handling. resolving forward automatically creates weird cases where you might want to use async later, and then sometimes it resolves forward and sometimes it rejects. For example, authorization would break under async in that case. Catch is basically the only thing we can do with the current system to make it work that doesn't break any sort of backwards compatibility that I know of.
Right. Yep. And I understand that. The more, I guess what I was getting at was like, we could certainly break some kind of backwards compatibility, right? It's 5.x. I mean, who knows? So if you have some ideas of like what to do with resolutions that do break backwards compatibility, I think it would be really valuable to discuss that, because maybe, once we hear it, maybe we all decide, yeah, no, that all sucks, so let's just do the rejection or whatever. But yeah, so does that make sense?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
that's what I was saying, like with the resolutions, like I feel like, yeah, the only way to really handle resolutions is something would have to change, right? We'd either have to have a stronger distinction between what middlewares are and what handlers are, or provide a way to basically know whether the resolution is telling us to go next or is telling us that they send a response, some kind of distinction there. I just don't 100% know is all. So yeah, I would love to hear it. And that's why I was saying, like, we could certainly go ahead and, if we really think that, at least for now, like that, there's probably not much more we can do, at least at this time, besides the rejection handling. I mean, I think that it's fair to probably add it to probably just get that into the next 5 alpha, just to appease people. So my thought there is that we would, with the next 5 alpha, is that we would publish a router 2 alpha, and then we would change Express 5 to depend on that, so that way we can, like, ongoing, be messing with those 2 guys. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds ideal. That was what I was going to suggest too, because there's been a few things sitting around for Router 2 for a while. So I can go ahead and put that together for the Router 2, and then you can pull that into Express 5, I guess. In terms of different things you can do with promises, I think a new router is probably best if we want to go beyond the catch. I tried a bunch of times to try and fit different approaches that we could do into it, but it just broke so many different things, and there's just so much middleware out there for Express that it's
Right.
kind of not worth it.
Yeah.
It's way better just to build a new router and be like, if you want this new cool thing, just like use this router and then just put it into the current like app.use. App.use is great because you can like have a router that follows a completely different paradigm, and all it needs to do is call next in the end.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, because especially with like the whole backwards compatibility thing, I don't know if I talked about it in here or maybe just to Yappa, but like one thing I've thought about before was to, if we had some kind of module, like say it was called middleware, right? That's already a module that's in use, so I'm just throwing that out there. But like if you had a module called middleware and it basically had a bunch of functions on exports that would allow you to wrap in different ways that would convert between things. So you could think of like, if you wanted to use the promise-based router, you could like call middleware dot something, and then as the argument you put your old style middleware, and then it would like basically fix it up to work with this new router. I thought a little bit about that as kind of like maybe that's some kind of possibility if we wanted to change, especially like the way like a built-in goes. So it's like, hey, if you're using an old style middleware, you can absolutely do it. You just gotta, sure, it sucks. You gotta wrap it a little bit, but maybe the author will release a new version. Who knows? And Koa has kind of like done a little bit like that as well, where they have, I think, there's like Koa Compose and things like that. Yeah, and so that could very well be, a module that we decide not to publish on the global NPM, but like under our @Express.js or @Pillar.js namespace or something. We still haven't done anything with those namespaces yet, just because we're so ingrained with the globals right now. but at some point we'll want to. And I've brainstormed a bunch with Yappa about that, I think, as well. So probably should put that on some agenda at some point, or write some stuff down or whatever. But yeah, cool. Anybody else have any thoughts about the Promise Async stuff, or just Router 2 Alpha in general before we move on? I mean, I guess we're moving on to Router stuff anyways, because the next topic is what are the responsibilities of the router. So this came up because there's an issue called advertised browser support in the router module, where it's basically like some people are using this router module in client-side stuff, using things like Browserify or Webpack or whatever. So basically run it on the client side, for routing and whatever. And so there's an issue where there was a user saying like, well, you can do that. One thing that sucks is that you have Browserify and stuff will like load up the entire buffer shim, which to be fair is pretty large. Just because in one spot we're sending a response, specifically the auto options feature, where we set a content length header, so it doesn't do chunked, so it's more, so it doesn't have it helps it especially with like splitting across packets, and especially with the Nagel algorithm and things. That's a little bit better with the newer nodes, but still it's nice to have content length. And that's just done like this. It just slapped in the standard best practice, which is to use buffer.byte length to calculate the actual UTF byte length of the actual string, because that's what you're going to send, instead of like the length, which is the number of glyphs, give or take, because of certain legacy reasons in JavaScript. But yes, basically the post that Wesley Todd made was moving. His suggestion, his proposal, at least right now, it's a proposal just for us to think about. Not necessarily answer here, but just to get us all thinking about it and people listening thinking about it, he wrote, move options responder to separate module. So his suggestion is that we remove the auto options feature and somehow move it to a separate module, which would of course require making the router somehow pluggable enough to be able to put this into a separate module in the first place. To give a little people or you guys who may not know a little primer, whenever in the current router, and of course, and we discussed this because I don't have a super great opinion either way. Like a lot of this, was done, by the various authors of Express, and it is what it is right now, and we can certainly change it, and that's why we have these kind of discussions. But that we have two auto features. So if you make a request to a route in the Express router and you use the head request method, it will go through the router like normal. If it finds a handler that matches that path that says I respond to head, it will invoke that. If it doesn't find that, but it finds one that for that path that responds to the get method, it will invoke that handler and then and then cut off the body, the response body and stuff, to basically do what a head would do, like how you're supposed to do a head. I'm simplifying here because I don't need to go into all the exact details. But so there's a similar thing with the options, and I'll get into what they're a little bit different in that we're not generating the body for a head because they're doing it. But for options, what we do is that when someone calls options and on a path, if we find a path that matches, that is declared as a route in the Express router, and there is no options method defined for us to invoke, we will essentially ask that route, hey, what methods do you have handlers for that path? And it will tell like, oh, I have one for get, I have one for post, and whatever. And it'll go like, okay, cool. And it'll basically write out an options response for you automatically. So it'll be like 200 okay or whatever, and basically say, here's what the methods you're allowed to do, and it sets a body with the methods again. Um, so there's basically a couple things here. It's like, one, there's a question of should the router even be doing this? I mean, just personally, I can come up with arguments both for and against it. So it's really so this is especially a good question for the TC because philosophical, like what is the scope of what the router module should be doing, kind of a thing. But also even then, just for that person's issue, which is they don't want to have the buffer thing there, we can actually solve that without changing anything. We can actually just stop sending a body in the stupid options response, right? Then we don't need buffer to calculate the size. You still have the allow header, which says the methods, and then they probably would have never even brought it up. So that's always an option too, just for us to think about, and I'm going to write that down, that issue. Just that another way, if the goal is, if the main concern here is that we use buffer, we can get rid of that. I mean, I don't care about the body, and I think there might have been a reason why there was a body too. I'll have to dig that up. I think I remember something about Android not liking not having a body or something. I don't remember, but we can dig that up. Another suggestion by like the person who brought it up was we could just use the length of the string instead of calculating the buffer length, even though that's bad practice, because methods should always be like, because the RFC defines what characters are allowed in a method, they can't be anything more than a single byte, even when encoded in UTF-8, I believe. I would have to double check to make sure that you're not allowed to have characters above 7F, but we'll have to check that, but still. So those are all options, and if anybody has thoughts here, feel free to bring it up, either here now or whatever, but it looks like a lot of this stuff is just to think about. Especially Blake, if Blake has thoughts. No, he's saying no. All right, cool. Well, we will move on to probably the next one. And like I said before, like this isn't always to come up with answers unless we say we're gonna come up with the answer now. We haven't had a need so far. It's always been either discuss it if we have to discuss it, or more like let's bring it up, get it on people's minds to think about, both our minds and the community minds. So the next one was added by Yapa, plan for the next version of Express Generator. So Express Generator, like I brought up before, is still going to generate, if you run it today, if you install the latest version today, it will generate a package.json that has Express dependency set to, I think, Squiggle 4.13.1. It will install 4.13.4, which is the latest one because it uses the tilde. So when they npm install, it will install the latest patch version. But it won't, out of the box, be 4.14, right? And typically we usually release the generator fairly close to each other. There's been a few simple things landed. I was trying to go through those pull requests and get a bunch of stuff landed. There was the ongoing debate about Pug. That was just always ongoing. I think that I didn't think about it before or whatever brought it up, but I think that we have a fair thing, and as far as I know, we'll put it into this 4.14 of the generator, which is that yes, it sucks that Jade is deprecated. It's still 100% usable. Yes, they're renaming the Pug and they mark the thing as deprecated. Sadly, it's still they had only alphas at the time, like so they released Pug, blah blah blah, alpha, blah, and they did keep tweaking it because I was looking through I don't use it personally, but I looked through the issues and people were complaining about it changing between these alphas. It's like it's reasonable. It's not. It's supposed to. That's what you're supposed to be able to do with an alpha. It's in beta right now. The biggest problem we have is Jade is the default template engine unless you specify something else. I looked up and I know I had an issue a while back just to have this was I think a year ago probably by now, just to have the then people with Express vote on what they thought was if we should keep Jade as the default or not. Because personally I usually pull for EJS just because it's simplistic, good way to get started because you just write JavaScript inside your templates. It's not great practice from a purity point of view, but it's easy to get started with. You don't have to learn like a bunch of crazy stuff. So that's why Jade has been debated a lot about in there, is just because especially because it's the default. So my point was that we got that I think pretty settled. I think we're going to settle what I feel like we're going to settle for, and anybody know in their comment if they think otherwise, is that for now we're going to, and of course if literally Pug releases a non-beta version before we do the publish, we'll probably revisit that real quick. But at least at the current state is that we will add Pug, we'll add it as an option, -- Pug. Jade will still be the default, and then if you could specify Pug, and it will give you the beta or whatever, and it'll be there, and we'll flip the default from Jade to Pug as soon as we can. We might even Express generator really doesn't follow Semver essentially. I mean, their versions I publish them to match the Express version, but that would mean the generator can't evolve independently of Express, and I just did that because that's how it was done before I kind of took over it, so whatever. The command line program, it's hard to really have a good Semver anyways, I feel like. It's more for libraries. But so we could potentially switch that from Jade to Pug as the default, even before even an Express 5.4.15. So I was trying to merge in, and I had mostly completed at the beginning of this week, and I just haven't gotten back to it yet. There's a few pull requests that consolidate those views. So if anybody's used a generator, you can pick your CSS flavor by doing -- CSS and saying what you want, like stylus, compass, and whatever less. But views are weirdly not like that. They're all their own command line argument that exclude each other for some reason, which is kind of weird. So there's been a few proposals to kind of consolidate that up, and I know they haven't been merged, and I think in the end it's kind of my fault because I didn't necessarily think about it at the time, but I realized, wait a minute, there's no reason. I kept not doing it because it was not backwards compatible, but then I realized, wait, we just don't remove the old command line options, because I feel like probably a lot of people are going to be using those command line options, so we might as well preserve them. So I was trying to get that into this release as well, so we would do -- view Jade or -- view Pug, and if they would do -- Jade still, we would use that unless they did the new format or something. So and that's really it, kind of that would wrap that up. And I just remembered as I was talking, and I mentioned this to Yappa too, is that we have that release process where we usually kind of for at least minor versions, just so we don't not overwhelmed with every single release, but at least for minor versions of things, like they have new features and things, to make that pull request. So I'm actually going to try to make that one right now in the generator project. So I'll probably make a release 4.14 pull request in that generator project, so we can say here's the new features in there, and here's what we want, here's what we would like to land to make this release. People like Rand can easily subscribe to that to know when is it released, so I can update the docs rather than someone coming by there and saying like, hey, let's update the docs. It can be like a more pull kind of scenario instead of pushing. Um, so, I mean, if anybody has objections to that, I mean, let me know. Otherwise, I feel like probably just do that. And the other thing I was talking about was Hage, was just like, especially some of these middlewares, um, to start getting more into like making the releases for the miners, so that way we can watch them and stuff. Um, yeah, I mean, anybody else have anything to add to that, or just other topics they want to bring up that are participants here right now?
All right, Doug. Considering the company which asked the current maintainer of Jade to rename it to whatever he wanted to, that he should remove all references to the word Jade. Do we want to support Jade?
Yeah, so that is that's really his problem. As far as I know, there is no legal thing that they can do to say like we can't have a command line argument called Jade.
Mhm.
So unless someone feels like really strongly about it, I don't see any reason, at least especially until Pug is out or anything, to remove like the word Jade from our own things. Um, I so I mean I don't know enough about it. I mean I can always touch base with Michael if we think it's a problem, but as far as I know, it shouldn't even matter.
Yeah, the thing is, we could use it as a command line argument, but what I'm concerned is about the package on npm. Would that still be there, or would it be unpublished?
Right. So your concern is like, would through all of this they have, either the maintainers or through some kind of order be compelled to unpublish the Jade
Right.
package from
Yep.
npm. So thus, the fact that our generator defaults to Jade
Yep.
still, by default, it would give you an uninstall, like something that can't be installed. Um, I think it's a valid concern. I think probably maybe what we should do is won't necessarily hold up the release per se, but just to give us a place to soundboard, I'll probably open up an issue, link to that old issue to reference the discussion. But maybe we want to reevaluate what the default should be. So the default, I believe, that was Jade because if everybody remembers the history a little bit, is that TJ actually made Jade and he made Express and all that. So of course he picked Jade as being the default. I mean, it made absolute sense. Um, so I mean, personally, I think something more like handlebars or EJS would be a better generic default than like Jade, because I always found I've never done Jade because I find like template's a template is a template. Why do I have to learn this thing when I'm perfectly fine with like handlebars and whatever, which is very simplistic and does pretty much what I usually need it to do anyways. Um, so I would love to hear especially your opinion on that, Yappa, from like you wrote some books and whatever,
Right.
and you know, and ideally we could get like some kind of better community input on that whole thing. Like
Mm.
maybe we can like put together like a survey monkey or something and
Yeah.
like put it somewhere for people to vote on or something, because that'd be cool. Because like really the express generator is for people. I mean we can make random choices too. Obviously if we have to make a choice to stop doing Jade, that's one thing. But then of course the question is what do we do instead, right? So if there's a way to know like, wow, everybody would just like handlebars better or something, then that's I feel like the best way to go about it rather than whatever I care about because I'm not the one really using it. So um, yeah, so what I'll do is I'll make an issue about that as well in the generator repo so we can track that guy, because it is a valid concern because once Pug is out there or whatever, they may unpublish it, even though it really sucks. But if there's legal crap or whatever. It's really up to NPM at that point.
Yeah. So I wonder, I mean, in theory, wouldn't it be possible to not have any default and just have, say that you have to specify whatever template, that you want, template engine you want to use? I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that would be a great idea, but if we want to sort of be completely agnostic, we could go that way, couldn't we?
Yeah, actually, I mean, that's certainly a good idea, especially because if we're going to add the dash dash views with this anyways, we could very well, that's another option. Absolutely. I didn't really think about that either, but yeah, so I think that's a valid idea. Like, hey, what if we say the dash dash views is a required option essentially? So either you can do generator with dash dash views, or because it already does prompts anyways, I, we could always, if you don't specify it, prompt for you to type it in or something too, potentially.
Yeah.
So
That
I
way
think that's certainly valid.
Yeah. That way we don't have to sort of pick a favorite or something.
Right. And in fact, so there was this one issue on their proposal to change like a lot of stuff about it, make it probably a lot larger than it is, which is fine. I forgot who done it. I didn't look at the issue. It was one of the folks from Strong Loop had put it in there a while ago. But like another, of course, thing that the Express generator could theoretically do is stuff like your npm kind of like default. So like maybe you could especially if once we make it required, right? Someone could just configure it to say, hey, every time I invoke it, just if I don't specify, use this as the template language. You know what I mean? So we could probably add some kind of like home file for that or whatever. Is also I guess open as well. So yeah, good ideas. I'll definitely I'll make a ticket and like outline all this on the generator project. I'll put a link in the discussion topic here for anybody listening, so that way they can definitely find it without having to go dig around. So cool. This all sounds like great ideas. That's the whole point of bringing it up, right? So awesome. I love it. Cool. Anything else? Anybody have want to bring up or thoughts on this? Or?
I was just going to mention there's an issue that's been open in the website repo for a couple of months now about I don't have the number right offhand, but it's about basically adding adding a license, Creative Commons share alike license, and I still want to do that, and I don't know, that issue's been open for almost 2 months now, and no one has objected to it. I think the idea was to sort of take that as implicit consent from all the previous contributors that no one cares. So I've been trying to get in touch with James Snell, and he hasn't been responding to me. So I've been kind of waiting for his input before I actually opened up a PR. But I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts on that matter. I think it's only a little bit sensitive from the perspective of I guess of IBM not sort of wanting to do something that could potentially open it up to legal action by someone saying, hey, I contributed something to the website and you guys put it under made it a Creative Commons and I didn't say you could do that explicitly. So, and I'm not a lawyer, and if it were up to me, I just do it, right? But I don't feel like I'm really in a position to do that without somebody like James kind of giving his approval. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys an update on that, and so it's not like it's being ignored. It's just sort of I'm waiting for James or somebody. So
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. We probably, at this point, might as well just do it because that's really what the biggest thing is. I went ahead and put a comment on the one issue, the one you put together, the proposal issue.
Yeah.
And I said, I guess let's just do it. I CC'd them on it, just to ping them again, but I mean,
yeah,
whatever. Another option we could always do is, if we really are not sure still, we could theoretically do it on a per page basis if we really wanted to, and then say only do the pages that we know, are probably not encumbered. So like, if Yappa has a bunch that maybe he had put for his book or whatever, and he knows that those are fine, especially some of those like tutorial ones, we might be able to do those. Like if we're writing some stuff for Express 5, we could probably do that one. I'm sure we can do the 3.x one, because like that was mainly written by TJ and Roman. So they'll be fine with that. They're not going to care. So yeah, that's always an option too. I just wanted to, I just thought of that too. So
that's a good idea. Well, I'm going to try and see if I can get some response from James or someone else here at IBM, because I'd really like to just do it and kind of get move on. But I don't want to get fired or anything. So
anyway, cool.
Thanks.
So yeah, I think that those are both things. Yeah, if we can get an answer from them and they say, well, don't care, then I think we'll just do it for the whole thing. If we still feel unsure, I think that we could probably do the intermediate thing of doing pretty much most of all the stuff. Think about like the resources page. There's not any real, like, some of the pages are facts, so like you can't copyright facts.
Right.
So
right.
There's a bunch of the pages that are just facts, like the resource page. So it's not something you can even copyright. So who cares?
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, we're not actually changing the copyright. We're changing the license. So it's a little bit, And again, I'm not a lawyer, so it's a little bit of a weird distinction, but.
Yeah. So the way it works is the people who have the copyright, basically who have the right to say how it's copied, have basically a say when you change the license, because essentially it was effectively the license I was under was basically like no real license, so it was like not really usable off. So us adding a license like this is basically telling people how it can be distributed, and so without the person who controls the right to make copies of it saying yes, you can, these people are all allowed to now make copies of it, is where they come into play with each other, kind of a thing. And I'm not a lawyer either, but that's as far as I know, my amateurish understanding of it. So, but yeah, so that's why I said, like, on especially areas like the resource page that's facts. Really putting even the CC Creative Commons license is almost not really useful anyways, because like I said, it's just facts. You can't do anything with facts. Facts are facts. They don't change just because you wrote them down. So.
Yeah, and you can make the same argument about a lot of like the API documentation, which is really just, like you said, they're just facts, the way the code works. And there's a few pages of the guide pages and whatnot that are maybe have a little bit leeway. But anyway, I don't think we need to belabor it. But I do want to try and get that resolved as soon as possible, and hopefully James or somebody, we can. If James doesn't respond, I'll try and find someone else at IBM who will at least say, "Go ahead, Rand. You won't get fired if you do this." So that's all I need.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, so one thing I forgot that I was going to mention at the beginning, and I will put a link to this in the discussions, as I figured out, so all these Hangouts have been going into like a YouTube channel under my name, and I guess it's okay. It wasn't great, but yesterday I figured out, hey, I can make a different YouTube channel. I have to re-upload the files. I started doing it, so I'm going to try to get this one and the ones before it all moved over there, and then going forward ones put under an actual YouTube channel for Express.js. so that way people could theoretically actually subscribe to that YouTube channel if they actually just wanted to, like, watch these meetings as they go. So that'd be pretty cool. So I will give some updates on that as well in the discussions as they go on. So cool. All right. So anybody has anything else? I think we'll call it a
Okay.
wraps for this.
Thanks, Doug.
All right. Bye,
Okay.
everyone.
Goodbye.
Thanks, guys.